If you've ever avoided painting roses because they feel intimidating, you are not alone. Roses are often considered one of the hardest flowers to paint, but this large-scale, step-by-step approach makes them surprisingly doable. So what are we waiting for? Let's jump right in. So I have here my watercolor supplies out and ready to go, watercolor paints, water, and a paper towel. And then of course we need some brushes. Because we're painting this rose on a larger scale today, I'll pull out some of my larger sizes, maybe a number 6 round and a number 10 round. And as a side note, my brushes are back in stock right now, so I will leave a link for these in the description of the video if you're interested, along with links and information for any of the other products you see me using today. All right, next up, I have my watercolor paper, and for me, I find it easier to paint with a little bit of a guide or an outline to follow, so I do have a simple penciled sketch of the rose outline on my paper. Let me pull out a darker drawing so that you can see this a little bit better though. If you enjoy drawing, then you can pause the screen and draw this for yourself, or if you want to save a little bit of time and just get right to the fun of painting, I will have this outline available in my Etsy shop. Then all you have to do after you print out the outline is trace it right onto your watercolor paper using a light table or even just a well-lit window in your house, and you're all set to go. With this outline, I'm planning to have this large size as well as some card sizes available as well. I thought with Valentine's Day on its way, it might be fun to make these into cards. So I'll leave a link for my Etsy shop in the description of this video as well. I'll just quickly tape my paper down with some artist tape and then we can get to painting. And you know, I think one of the reasons why roses can be difficult sometimes is because there are so many petals and pieces to them, and usually they are on a small scale. So by painting this flower in a larger size today, I think that's going to help simplify some of that aspect a little bit. Now, this is an optional step, but I am actually going to lighten up some of these pencil lines a little bit just so they're not quite so noticeable in the end. To do that, I'll just take a kneaded eraser, shape it into sort of a hot dog shape, and then just roll it across my paper. This is just going to take off the loose graphite that might be on the page, and in turn it will make the drawing a little bit lighter in value. All right, next up, let's get a color on our tray that we'd like to use for our rose. You really can choose whatever color you'd like to do with this. I think I'm going to try maybe a darker reddish pink color. So I'll take some cadmium red and mix it with some alizarin crimson, and this is going to create a really rich looking color. I will also just pull out some pure alizarin crimson with maybe a bit of extra water added to it for a slightly lighter version, and that way we can use that as more of a base layer. Now, since I've already got this large number 10 round brush out and ready to go with a bit of color still in the bristles, I'll just take some extra water here and go ahead and paint the largest part of this flower first. You can see that my water is still pretty tainted from mixing all those colors, but that's okay. We are just going to be adding more in here later. I'll just go ahead and fill this entire section or space with water, and don't be afraid to use a lot. I was actually going to use that lighter watered down alizarin crimson on this part, but my water is tainted enough. I don't think I need to do that anymore. So after I have this base layer on, I'll just go ahead and take a touch of the darker reddish pink color and start dropping that into this wet layer. I'm going to try to focus this color in where I feel like some shadow areas might be, like right under the folded over lip of the petal, just right above this area, maybe a touch on the sides, and of course down at the bottom. Really just wherever you think it might look good or where it makes sense. The biggest key here is to try not to control this too much. Let the water and the paint do most of the work for you. Because this area is pretty wet, this darker paint that I'm adding in here is spreading around pretty well on its own. I'm just guiding it a little bit. I think another key thing here is to have both lighter and darker spots to create some variety and depth. We don't want this all to look exactly the same, or that's going to make it appear more flat. Okay, I think that is pretty good just how it is. I don't want to mess with that too much. We'll just kind of let it do its thing. Now, before I move on, I am going to dry this off really quickly with my hair dryer. It's a large enough space. I don't want to risk putting my hand in it or something as I continue painting. All right, that is the largest space on this flower to cover, so we are off to a good start. Let's go ahead and switch over to the medium-sized number 6 round brush now and take a touch of our darker shadow color and just paint in the very center part of the flower next. We want this to be one of the darkest spots on the flower. I'm not even painting this wet on wet or anything. I'm just putting the color straight on there to keep this nice and dark. Now, I think something that can be intimidating about a rose is looking at the overall piece and feeling overwhelmed. There's a lot of parts and pieces to this, but the key is to break it down piece by piece and petal by petal and just focus on one little space at a time. So the next few sections that we're going to focus on, we are going to be painting more of the highlighted areas of the flower or the petals. So I'm just using some tainted water for my brush to fill the majority of the area in first, and then we can just add a hint of color at the base of them and let them bleed out a little bit to create a slight gradient of color. You'll also notice that at this point I'm starting to skip around the flower a little bit to allow for some drying time in between these. That way our petals won't just all blend and bleed right into each other. This is going to keep them a little bit more separate and help define the flower a little bit more. Another reason why this rose in particular is a great one to start learning how to paint roses with, besides it being a little bit larger in scale, is that I also don't have quite as many petals to paint on this one. This is a little bit more simple. It's at more of a side-facing view, like a rosebud that's just started to open, so there are less petals to have to worry about. But it is still elegant and pretty in the end, and it also gives you good practice for a more complicated rose later on. I hope you are enjoying this tutorial so far. I hear from people often that roses are a struggle for them, but they are such a beautiful and classic flower. I want everyone to feel like this is something they can tackle, so I really hope this is helpful for some of you out there. If you find you are enjoying my painting and teaching style, then I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on any of my new and upcoming tutorials. Okay, with this larger highlighted petal top here, I'm just adding in some small touches of color to create sort of the look of ruffles, but I'm still keeping this pretty light in value so that it will stand out from the darker petals around it. Also, just as a side note, I just recently launched a new channel with just some relaxing nature footage and sounds if you enjoy relaxing, meditating, or even painting to that sort of thing. So I'll leave a link for that in the description of this video as well if you'd like to check that out. Now that we have some of the main highlighted spots on our flower, we can start painting in some of the smaller, darker areas now. I'll paint these in a very similar way with some water or a light valued color of paint as the base layer, and then I'll dab in some touches of darker color to create the shadow areas. One of the biggest things to help create a rose look is by having a contrast in values with the petals that touch each other. So try to make the next door petals different values, whether it's lighter or darker than the one it's sitting right next to, so that each petal can sort of stand out on its own. Some of these petal areas we're coming to are going to be both between the light and the dark petals. So in these cases, I will try to create a gradient of color so that the new petal I'm painting can have both light and dark values and fit right in between these. Hopefully that makes some sense, but you will see what I mean as we continue on. And I will still be jumping around on this flower a little bit to allow for some drying time before I paint right next to a petal, just so that we won't bleed them together. Another fun little element that you can try on roses. I don't have a lot of spots on this particular one to do this with, but maybe we can try it in the very dark center here. But to help create some highlighted areas on darker petals, you can actually lift off some color. Just take some water on the tip of your brush and paint it in the area that you'd like a lighter value to be, and then use your paper towel and dab it off. This is a fun little trick that can also add some great dimension. That was a little bit of a sidetrack, but I'll just continue on here with some more petals with some gradation of value. Now we don't have a lot of petals on this particular rose that really flare out because this is more of a bud shape, but there are a few that we can have a lot of fun with. These are going to add a lot of the detail and character to the piece, and it's really not too difficult to do. I'll start out by wetting down the area with water first. This time I'm trying not to have it too tainted with color though. I really want it to be a nice gradient or contrast in values on this one, so I do want some spaces that can be pretty light in value. Then I'll take a touch of color and start spreading that in closest to the main part of the flower where the shadow would be. I'll spread this color out and up into the petal a little ways, and maybe even a touch around the outer edge of the petal just so that it kind of stands out from that white paper behind. But again, I'm going to try to leave some brighter, more light spaces in here to create a bigger contrast. That is a good start. Now it's time for the darkest color. I want this to be darker than the main part of the flower it's touching. So I might even just pull out some alizarin crimson straight from the well here rather than mixing it on my tray first. It will probably spread a little bit on its own, but you can help it out with your brush a little bit if you need to as well. Look how cool this is. These petals can really bring some life to the overall flower. So let me finish this last little section here near the inner part of the rose, and then we can do the last two outer ruffly petals. Okay, good. I'll just paint this next petal here in a similar way as we did that other outer petal with some water first, and then I'll add in some darker color closest to the inner parts of the petal with maybe a little bit on the outer edge, and then I'll add in that really dark concentrated paint straight from the paint well to finish it off. We're at our last petal here, and this is all really coming together nicely. I'll paint this one in the same way as we did the other two outer petals. All right, very good. Isn't that so pretty? Hopefully, it wasn't too hard for you to do either. Of course, the more you practice, the better you are going to get at it too. All that's left now is to paint in a bit of greenery around the rose. I think I'll try a little bit of sap green today, and maybe to make it a little bit more cohesive with my color scheme, I'm going to add a touch of our petal color in there. So I'll add some of this alizarin crimson from our tray in the mix as well. I'll paint these in using the wet on wet technique just so I can get that color to blend and spread out well. So I'll paint a section with some water first, and then I'll start dropping in the green paint color. And sort of like we did with the petals, I'll try to have some spots that are lighter and darker in value just to give some variety and dimension. While we let some of those sections dry, I'll go ahead and paint in the stem next, pretty much in the same way as we've been doing, but I'll try to keep the darker color more off to just one side of the stem for the shadow. Maybe while I'm here, I'll go ahead and paint in one of these leaves really quick too. I'll just use that darker color near the center of the leaf to kind of create a shadow near the vein line area. All right, when all of these other spots are dry, we can go ahead and finish off painting in the rest of the greenery on the page. I'll just dry this off really good with my hair dryer really quickly, and then for one final finishing touch, I'll take a small amount of green paint and using the very tip of the number 6 round, or you could use a smaller, more fine brush if you need to, and I'll just paint in some vein lines on the leaves. I thought about adding maybe some veins on the rose petals, but in the end, I decided to just leave it how it is. So I guess that is it for this piece today. I hope you had some fun with this and maybe even learned something new. If you did enjoy this tutorial, I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't already so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side.